Hi, it's Nick S, the CD Man, with another video in my What I've Been Purchasing or New Music Finds video for Wednesday, September 7th, 2022. We'll start off with a 45 record that I got this week. I didn't get the sleeve because the sleeve is in my collection already. The record, unfortunately, skipped, and it was difficult to find the sleeve, so I'm going to reuse the old sleeve. It is a record by LL Cool J on the Def Jam label, called Going Back to Cali, from the movie Less Than Zero. That's a movie starring Robert Downey Jr. and Janie Gertz, among others. And then Jack the Ripper, a then non-album cut, was on the B-side. And the sleeve is downstairs. So there's my record there. Great. Put the record down. Okay. For new releases this week, there were a total of 7. There were a total of 7 new releases for this week. We start off with a compilation. I'll call it a compilation. I will not call it a greatest hits. She already has the greatest hits, but I'll call it a compilation. From the great Shania Twain. Shania was a country singer that had major hit albums from around the mid-1990s through around... Well, her last album was out in the second half of the 2010s. She's got a special out called Not Just a Girl, and the compilation from it called Not Just a Girl, The Highlights, is right here. And it features tracks from many of her albums, including a new track, Not Just a Girl, and the top 40 pop hits, You're Still the One, Man, I Feel Like a Woman, Who's Better If Your Boots Been Under, Any Man of Mine, Don't Be Stupid, You Know I Love You, From This Moment On, which is the album version, not the single version, Love Gets Me Every Time, That Don't Impress Me Much, Forever and Always, the red version, I'm Gonna Get You Good, the red version, and it goes up as far as Life's About to Get Good from the last album. Shania Twain and Not Just a Girl, The Highlights. Up next is an album, one of two, that was back-ordered, or I got it kind of late in my eyes. The album is by... Let me get the name of the artist. Hold on here. It doesn't say what the name of the album is here. Hold on. It doesn't say the name of the album. Let's open it. Let's crack it. This is the album right here. I believe it's the latest album for the Suicide Boys. They're a rap group. And let me just crack this open and see if it says anywhere in here the name of the album or any information, because that's not saying it on the CD. It's Sing Me a Lullaby, My Sweet Temptation by the Suicide Boys, which I mistakenly bought digitally. Next up is the second album. This one got delayed in shipping to me, but I did finally get it, and that is Rockers' Machine Head of Kingdom and Crown. I've heard good things about this from people who say they want to hear this album, including Brendan Schneider and Pete Pardo of Sea of Tranquility. Anyway, then I got a new album by a very popular country singer these days, Jon Pardi. The single on the album is called Last Night Lonely, and it has just broken the top 40 on the pop singles chart. Jon Pardi and Mr. Saturday Night. Let me get this, okay. And then we got And You Know Us by the Trail of the Dead. Their album is called 11 Bleed Here Now. That's the latest album. It's right there for you. And then two long-running metal acts, or hard rock acts, have come back with new albums. I got both of them. First one is by King's X. That's Doug Pennick, Ty Tabor, and Jerry Gaskill. Three Sides of One. And my album of the week. That belongs to a legendary metal act. Now, their only top 40 record was in 1992, Symphony of Destruction. And they've been recording back as early as the second half of the 1980s. The one constant has been their lead vocalist and bassist. I believe it's bassist. A former Metallica member in the very early stages of Metallica. His name is... I'm not remembering his name. Hold on. I'm going to crack this baby open. His name is Dave Mustaine. Excuse me. I apologize for that. His name is Dave Mustaine. And he was the bassist in Metallica before Cliff Burton. He left Metallica. In came Cliff Burton. And the rest was history up until Cliff's untimely passing. It's Megadeth. Album of the week. The Sick, the Dying, the Dead. Album of the week. Heard good things about it. Haven't listened to it yet. I've heard really good things about it. Okay, so that takes care of the new releases for the week. Next up, we got our CD singles, of which I had 3. Rapper Mr. Moneyloke, and a low charting single called I'm a Rolla. It was his only chart record. European dance act W with their version of Run to You. And T Key, their only chart record, female rapper, Insane. Now, none of those, as far as I know, are on full-length albums. If they do pop up on a full-length album, then I'll be purchasing that at a later date. Hold on a moment. Next up is the Billboard chart records for this week. The ones I purchased for this week. There's a shoehorn of those. Let's get them ready. There's some here. Let's get more. Okay, let's get more. Okay, so let's do this. First up is a rap group called the RBL Posse. I believe the single is called How We Comin', and the album is called An Eye for an Eye. It's on the Big Beat record label from 1997. I believe it's 1997. Let's make sure that's right. Yeah, 97, and it's An Eye for an Eye, the RBL Posse. Next up, we have Spice One. Now, Spice One has made the Hot 100 before, but this was a lower charting record he did called 1996 Kill 'Em All, featuring MC8. And the album's called 1996 Spice One. Next up is a R&B vocalist, Rashan Patterson, self-titled album. And the single is called, I believe it's called Spend the Night, but I'm not positive on that though. Rashan Patterson on the MCA label, and the year was let me get the year, hold on. Not even saying the year on here. I can't get the year on there. Next up is a very heavy, is another industrial band, KMFDM. The name of the album is called, I believe it's called Symbols. And the single from the album is Megalomaniac. And it, believe it or not, was the legendary industrial band's only chart single in the 1990s. And I believe, if my sources tell me right, that they have a new album coming out. Next up is an R&B vocalist or rapper named Strawberry on the, let me get the label here, Lime Light record label. The single is called Saddle You Up. The album is called Nothing Better, Strawberry with an I. Next album is by a legendary actor and comedian. Got his start on television Saturday Night Live in the 1980s, around 1980-81. Put out his first vocal album in 1985 called How Could It Be, and had 2 top 40 hits in the 1980s. First, the number 2 selling Party All the Time, and then the top 30 single Put Your Mouth on Me in 1989. It's Eddie Murphy, and the name of the album is called Love's Alright. And I believe Michael Jackson has something to do with this album on here somewhere. And the single is I Was a King. You might also look for another track on the album, Was Up. Let me get that proper name on here for that other single. Hold on. The other single is called Was Up With You, and I believe Michael Jackson does something on that record. Next up is Intrigue. Now, this album is going to be replaced. I've already ordered a replacement for it. You might want to know about me. I do not like albums that have this gold stamp on the cover. Those are not allowed in my record collection, CD collection, and I usually return them. I usually replace them when the said albums are sent to me. The group is Intrigue, and the name of the song is called, I'm not sure the name of the single, but it has a great version on here of the Chicago classic Hard to Say I'm Sorry, released about a year before the As Yet cover. Next up is a group called The Artifacts. I remember hearing from my brother's rap records, Wrong Side of the Tracks, a earlier single for this group, and a song called, let me get the name of it again, hold on. The Ultimate made the bottom of the Hot 100. It's That's Them by rappers The Artifacts. Next up is one of the couple country albums that had low charting records. Country artist Ray Atkins and What's Living All About. The track that I believe is Better Than It Used to Be. Another artist to have early chart records and a spot on the soundtrack to Batman Forever, or Batman and Robin, Batman and Robin, is vocalist Eric Benet. You may better know Eric Benet for doing a cover of Georgie Porgy, the Toto song with Cheryl Lynn that he did with Faith Evans, and Spend My Life With You, his only top 40 pop record with the great Tamia. I got his first album, Eric Benet, and True to Myself, and the song on the album was also on the Batman and Robin soundtrack, True to Myself. Next up would be another country album, and the title cut was a low charting record. It's Hal Ketchum, I Saw the Light. He's another one of those Curb Records country artists. Next up is another one, Bay Area rappers, The Wanderers. The song where I got it for was, let me get the name, Wanderin'. And the name of the album is Wanderin' by The Wanderers. Next up is an album by Too Cool Chris. Now, this wasn't easy to find, and it was kind of expensive, if I remember correctly. It's Time to Party is the name of the song that made the charts. It's Too Cool Chris, and the name of the album is called It's Time to Party. Next up would be an album by ALT. Let me make sure I get this right. ALT, who's more famous for a song on Casey's Top 40. Radiant Records actually made the top 40 Radiant Records chart, but not the Hot 100, called Tequila. It's ALT and Stone Cold World, his ALT's second album from 1993. The song from that album that I got it for is All Night Long. Next up, another country singer. Now, he's had top 40 records, including one in 1998 and one again in, I believe, 2000 or 2001. Talking about Clay Walker. And the song I got it for was If I Could Make a Living was one on here. You Make It Look So Easy is on here. Might be some others. And it's Clay Walker, If I Could Make a Living. Next up is another act, and this was their only chart record again. We're talking about Condition Red on the independent label of O-Town Records from 1993, Don't Get Caught Sippin'. And that's the single on the album, Don't Get Caught Sippin'. Next up, we have the Barrio Boys. They're a Latin version of the Backstreet Boys type sound, and my wife's had a couple of our albums. The Barrio Boys, the song's called How We Roll, and the album's called How We Roll, Barrio Boys. Another one I had to replace, but I got the replacement in time for the video. It's a kind of an acoustic pop artist, something in the vein of adult top 40 or adult adult AAA music. Something you hear on stations like PLJ in New York in their heyday. Michelle Lewis and Little Leviathan. And the track on the album was Nowhere and Everywhere is the name of the track on the album that charted. And that's a pile of albums that were for the charts. And finally, my slew of albums for CTI Records. And as of last week, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to list, best I can, the artists that perform with everybody on the albums. So we'll start with pile number one. The first small pile is right here. We start out with an album from, let me get the year on here, let me get the year that's recorded. Recorded in 1970. The main artist is Antonio Carlos Huban. Also on the album of note are Hubert Laws, Joe Farrell, Ron Carter, Airto, Umar Deodato, among others. And it's Antonio Carlos Huban and Tide. Next up is, along with the CTI Records recordings, I delved into the remaining albums I'm missing from the great Grover Washington Jr. Grover was on CTI Records, and his early works were produced by Creed Taylor, as were most of these works. But the later recordings on Motown were on the straight Motown label and were produced by other people. The first of those Grover Washington Jr. albums I'm going to show is A Secret Place. The album was from 1976, and it features the single A Secret Place. Next up, an artist that was working back in the 50s and 60s with the great Dave Brubeck. He had stepped out on his own by the time 1970s came around. And this album's from 1975. It's Pure Desmond by Paul Desmond. Now, working with Paul on this album were... Let me get the listeners here. Working with Paul on this album were Ron Carter on bass, Connie Kay on drums, and Ed Bickert on the guitar. Paul was on alto saxophone. Next up, another album by Stanley Turrentine. This time he had moved away from our friend Creed Taylor. And the album originally was released on the Elektra label, and also featured Lee Ritenour, David T. Walker, Wah-Wah Watson, Sonny Burke, among others. The album is Betcha, and it's by Stanley Turrentine. This is the Wounded Bird reissue from the year of 2005. Next up is another one from Grover Washington Jr., and it features what possibly could be one of my top 3 Grover Washington Jr. songs. A beautiful record that is rumored, actually was in an article, that actress Aubrey Plaza was named after the song, the original version by Bread with David Gates on vocals. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful ballad from the mid-70s by Bread. Well, Grover covered the song, made it his own, and it actually does quite well with the song. It's really a great, beautiful record. The album is called Soul Box, and the song is called Aubrey, and it's Grover Washington Jr. Next up, we have an album that was recommended to me by my fellow jammer, Christian Vega. Another Hubert Laws album, and it's called The Rite of Spring. It's really like a hybrid classical jazz album. And the key track to listen for is Pavane, P-A-V-A-N-E. I'm not going to try to pronounce that. And on the album with Hubert is Bob James, Ron Carter, Jack DeJohnette, Airto, among others. I had the pleasure of seeing Jack DeJohnette when he performed with Bobby McFerrin in the 1990s. Not a typical Bobby McFerrin concert, but a really nice one that my mom took me to. Next up would be Stanley Turrentine with Milt Jackson, and an album called Cherry, another Creed Taylor production, this time from 1972. The key track is Speedball. And playing with Stanley and Milt on this album are Bob James, Cornell Dupree, Billy Cobham, and Ron Carter. Next up, another album by Airto, and I think it's actually an album I already have, but under another name. I have the album Free by Airto, and I think a reissue of Free was under another name on the Wounded Bird label called Return to Forever. Airto. And here's another album on CTI Records that didn't have Creed producing. Dave Grusin, the jazz and piano master, was the producer on this album. It is the lady who sang Baby Come to Me and took it all the way to number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 with James Ingram in 1983. Patty Austin. The album's called Havana Dance. Really, really, really great album from Patty Austin, Havana Dance. I got another album by Joe Farrell, probably the best of the Joe Farrell albums, Moon Gems. On the album with Joe is Herbie Hancock on the piano, Stanley Clarke on the bass and vocals, and Jack DeJohnette again on the drums. Next pile. Here's the next pile of those records recordings. Another Antonio Carlos Huban album. This time from... This is 1988 pressing, we know that. And it was recorded in 1967, called Wave. Next up, an album, probably his best-known album, Deodato, Umar Deodato, who you might know from Kool and the Gang, early recordings in the early 1980s recordings, late 70s, early 1980s recordings. The hit single was also Spruce Zarathustra, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, and that was a top 5 record, in 1973. We have Deodato and Prelude. Next up, an album from Esther Phillips. She's more noted for What a Difference a Day Makes, her cover of the Dinah Washington classic, that she took to the top 20 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1975. But this album was a 1988 pressing. It's called From a Whisper to a Scream, Esther Phillips. Next up is another album by Wes Montgomery. Wes does a couple covers on this album. The Beatles, A Day in the Life, Percy Sledge, When a Man Loves a Woman, the Beatles, Eleanor Rigby, the Association's Windy, and a single from the album called California Nights. It's Wes Montgomery from, and again, I think this is 1986 pressing, A Day in the Life. Another George Benson. Now George is joined by Phil Upchurch, Kenny Barron, Ron Carter, Steve Gadd on an album from recorded in 1974, and the popular track was a cover of the classic Take 5 by the Dave Brubeck Quartet, George Benson and Bad Benson. Next up, another album by George Benson. I'm going to get you the guest list on this album with George. The players. Give me a second. Players in the album include Earl Clue on the El Mar track, Ron Carter, Herbie Hancock, Billy Cobham, Airto, among others. On the album are tracks like California Dreamin' by the Mamas and the Papas, Theme for the Summer of 42 by Peter Nero, and the great Jefferson Starship track, White Rabbit, was a featured song on there. We're talking about George Benson and White Rabbit. Next up is another album from Antonio Carlos Jobim, probably the best of his three that I've gotten so far. Also with Antonio on the album is Umar Deodato, Joe Farrell, Hubert Laws, Ron Carter, Airto. And the album was recorded in 1970. And it's called Stoneflower. Next up, another album from George Benson. I'm going to get my information for George. The album was recorded in 1971 and features George with Ron Carter on bass, Jack DeJohnette on drums, Clarence Palmer on organ, and Michael Carmen and Albert Nicholson on percussion. Featured tracks include a cover of the Miles Davis classic So What, and that's the focus track. It's George Benson and Beyond the Blue Horizon. Another one would be I thought I was getting something else with this. I thought I was getting a double 2-disc album. I've since ordered the other one that's missing. But we're talking about Freddie Hubbard on the BGO label reissue. Playing with Freddie on the album are Carl Randall Jr. on the tenor saxophone and flute, George Cables on the electric piano, Henry Franklin on the Fender bass, Carl Burnett on the drums, and Buck Clark on the congas and percussion. We're talking about an album that was recorded in 1975. And we have Gleam, Gleam, by Freddie Hubbard. Double album, and it comes in a nice slipcase here. Let me put this back in the slipcase. Nice slipcase here. You can see like that. There we go. Next up is another album by Freddie Hubbard with Joe Henderson, Herbie Hancock, Ron Carter, and Lenny White. Recorded in 1970, except track number 6 recorded in 1971. The popular track was was the title cut, and Cold Turkey, a cover of the John Lennon classic, is also on. I believe. Let me make absolutely sure it's a cover of the John Lennon classic. Hold on. Yes, cover of the John Lennon classic is on here as well. The title cut is the most popular song on the album. We're talking about Freddie Hubbard and Red Clay. Give me a second. The last pile of CTI records before we get to the big CTI record release for the week is next. The late Dr. Lonnie Smith, Also on the album is Grover Washington Jr., Ron Carter, Billy Cobham, Airto. It was recorded in 1971, and it's called Mama Whaler, Lonnie Smith. We've also got an album by Milton Nascimento. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Courage. I'm not going to go through who's on the album because there's too much stuff on here to explain, but 68 and 69 were the years it was recorded. Next up is another album by Stanley Turrentine with Ron Carter, George Benson, and Freddie Hubbard. Most popular song on the album is Sugar, which is in 2 versions, studio and live. Stanley Turrentine, excuse me. Next up is an album by Deodato, which I actually received 2 of because I thought one was not in great shape. And it's a live recording called Live at Felt Forum. And yes, there's a live version of his number 2 smash, also Sprach Zarathustra. Next up, an album by Johnny Hammond. Johnny's with Hank Crawford, Grover Washington Jr., Eric Gale, Airto, Billy Corbin, Danny Moore, and Johnny Williams on Breakout. And the most popular song on the album is a cover of It's Too Late, the Carole King classic. And the album was recorded in 1971. Next up is a greatest hits, or sort of a best of the CTI A&M years for George Benson. It includes California Dreamin', Take 5, and Theme from Summer 42, George Benson, and the best of George Benson. Next up, another best of, Airto. The best of Airto. Next up, an album by Stanley Turrentine again. This time, let me get a year for this one here. Give me a second. The album was recorded it was originally released in 1971. And Vera Cruz was. 1971. And the popular song was the title cut, written by Milton. I'm not going to pronounce his last name again. It was Stanley with Ron Carter, Billy Cobham, Airto, Umar Deodato, Richard Teague, Eric Gale, among others. And it's called Salt Song. Next up, an album by Paul Desmond. Paul recorded the album in 1969. And he's with Don Sabeski and an orchestra from The Hot Afternoon. Next up, another George Benson album. Let me get a year this was recorded. Give me a second. I'll give you the information here. The album was recorded in... it was in a vault up until 1984. Oh, that's news to me. It was in a vault until 1984. It was actually scheduled to be A&M CTI Records combo, last recording and set in a vault. I Got a Woman and Some Blues, George Benson. Next up, a double album, 2 albums in 1 double disc set. In the Beginning by Hubert Laws, and In Concert, Carnegie Hall by George Benson and Hubert Laws. Then we've got Deodato, another Deodato album, this time with his follow-up single, Super Strut, and a cover of Rhapsody in Blue. It's called Deodato 2. Let me get my hand out of the way. After that, we've got another album by Wes Montgomery. This time featuring covers of Greensleeves, Fly Me to the Moon, Yesterday, Scarborough Fair Canticle, and Where Have All the Flowers Gone? It's Road Song, Creed Taylor production. Wes Montgomery. Got another another Grover Washington Jr. album, another 2 Grover Washington Jr. albums. One of the early ones, an album that featured covers of All the King's Horses, Where Is the Love, Body and Soul, Lean on Me. It's Grover Washington Jr. and All the King's Horses. Get my hand out of the way. And the final of the CTI Records recordings is the last Motown recording Grover ever did. He owed the label one more album, and in 1980 released Skylarkin. Album was hard to find. It even has nice OBI strip. All that there. And the single was Snake Eyes, which made the R&B charts in 1980. From there, Grover would go on. Grover, who had already released an album on Elektra Records, would go on to Elektra Records for several more albums, including that classic Wine Light, and then would go on to Columbia Records for the rest of his career. Me personally, his early Elektra recordings are killer. The last recording I have for you is something kind of special. It's what got me on the start for collecting the CTI Records recordings. It's a box set, 4 CDs of, I hope I can show the whole thing, called, let me get the name of this here, CTI Records, The Cool Revolution. Now I'm on a quest to get every album on the cover here. Those have not been shown in videos are on their way to me. The album comes with 4 discs. Let me get the information here. Comes with a nice thing here. Came with 4 discs. Had to order it from Canada because in the United States the album's not not available. I couldn't find it in American wise. Open it up like that. There we go. See the 4 CDs? Get that there in the video. Yeah, there we go. Got it. And there are 4 CDs. The first disc is called Straight Up. The second disc is Deep Grooves, Big Hits. The third disc is The Brazilian Connection. And the last disc is Cool and Classic. Really, really, really great stuff. And it looks like it's in a record album sleeve, but it's not. It's actually 4 CDs. And I've been waiting for this for a while. I'm very excited to dive into this. Have already started to dive into it, but not fully yet. So that's what I got for this week. I know it was a lot of stuff, but I'm so glad to show it to everybody. One programming note before I finish the video. That is, I believe on Thursday, you will see the first in a series of #1 albums on the Billboard 200. The 1970 year, I've got to listen to 2 more albums. Actually, 3 more albums. And then I will be done and ready to show 1970. Anyway, for now, that's what I've been purchasing or new music finds for September 7th, 2022. I'm Nick S., the CD Man, and this is the CD Man channel. If you like the video, subscribe, hit the like button, hit the dingy to get notified. Have a great day and keep listening to Physical Media.